Hi there. In this video, we will explore methods, aka subroutines, in the mouse module. We will look at how to create instance, class, and static methods. And also, we're going to look at how to mark your methods as private. Let's start by looking at the instance method. And as the name implies, the instance method is called when you initialize a new instance from a class. So let's add a test attribute first, and I'm going to say this is called name, and let's say that this is read-only. And we don't really care about the type or any other definitions here. We just want to set a random value. And also, let's going to say that we want a subroutine, which is going to be called test, similar as we created before. And we're going to get a couple of arguments when we call this test subroutine. So let's do this. I'm actually going to print out those arguments. I'm not going to do anything with them at the current time. So let's use a module that we have used many times before, which is called data. Oops, actually data, dumper. And let's warn out what we are getting as arguments in the subroutine. And as we know from the basics, that we can get the arguments from variable which is contained in array that we can access by saying at and underscore. And all we're doing here, we're just getting a reference of this global variable so we can print out the arguments more nicely. So if I save this, and let's go to the test script. It looks like we already have an instance of a human. So all I'm going to do here, I'm going to say human, and I'm going to call this subroutine. Let's see what we're going to get. So if I call the script, you can see here that we get one argument, which is a blessed hash of a human type. So basically, this is our instance of a human. Now, if I provide an argument, let's say we can just give it the letter A. Let's save that, rerun it. We're going to see that we now have two arguments in the list. So first is the self context, and the second one is the actual argument that we passed to the test function. So what we can always do with this first argument, we can access initialize state of attributes and other logic on this class. So I'm going to change that and say my self and the rest of arguments, just going to say this is in args and $underscore. So all we're doing here, we're accessing the argument list from this global variable and storing the first argument in self and the rest of the arguments in a new array called args. So now, if I, for example, do warn dumper self name, save the human class, and what we want to do here, we want to actually set the name, and I'm going to set this to Joe. Save that and rerun the script. We're going to see that we printed out Joe. This is a key point of instance method. When you get an instance of a class, you're always going to get the self current context as the first argument. And on that self context, you can call subroutines and attributes that have been initialized. Now let's see how class and static methods differ from instance methods. Let's look at the class method first. I'm not going to change anything in this test subroutine. I'm just going to change the printing of self name to self. And I'm going to reference the args, which we are setting from the global variable. And I'm going to go back to the test script, and let's change the human instance to actually call it from a class name. Note here that I'm removing the $sign before human. So that means I'm calling this method on a class name instead of an instance of a human. So if I save this, go to the console and run the script, but we're going to see that the first variable is actually going to be just a string. It's not the current context of initialized instance of a human class, it just becomes a string. So basically what we're getting here now is a first argument. When we're calling the method on the class name itself, it is the class name. So to define this more correctly, we can say that the first argument is actually the class, not the self. We change this up, we run the script, it's still human, and what we can do here, we can say new on the class name. If I save this, rerun the script, and now we're going to see that we have a human instance because we call the new on a human class, which holds a string that we can use to initialize a new instance. It might seem confusing, but just to show this by example, I can also change this to just a string human and call an arrow function new on it. If I save this, rerun the script, you're going to see that we're still getting the human instance by calling a function new over here. It might be a little bit confusing, but basically all you need to know is the actual package, aka class name, to initialize a new instance. Now here we can be always sure that this class name is going to refer to the current context, which is a human package. Final method type is called static method. How you call a static method is by replacing the arrow notation with two colons. So human colon colon test, and you can provide arguments if you wish to do so. If we save this, and let's see what we have in a human class. So it's a class, the rest of the arguments, and then we're just printing out a new instance by initializing it. So I'm going to change this to class, save it up, and let's see what we're getting. Right, what you're going to notice is that the first argument that we got on a class is actually the one that we're passing into the test function. When we call a static method, we're not getting an instance or a class name. All of the arguments passed to the function are given to the global variable as they are. So you're not getting automatically either the self context or the class name as the first argument. Now you might be wondering why static methods might be useful. There can be scenarios where you have constants or let's say a version number that you just want to print out by calling a method on the package name. And you don't really want to initialize all the variables or call any other functions. It's basically very static data you want to access. And if you go back to the class method by calling it via the arrow function, it's more of a utility method. There are times where you don't want to initialize a new instance before, so you can call a class method where we can get a class name and actually get the self context inside the method as such, so class new, and then we might want to do extra logic there. But it really depends on the scenario and the context in how you want to call these methods and when each type would be the most appropriate. Now to mention the final thing about the private methods, there really isn't anything special about private methods, so all you do is you mark your methods with underscore prefix, and you shouldn't really call it outside on your instance of a class. So for example, if I mark test as a private, I don't want to use my human instance to, for example, say human and underscore test and call that method, because this underscore tells the caller that this method actually belongs to the class logic itself. So what is the intended use is, for example, if you say another method, new methods, and we get our self, first argument, so at underscore, and we can say self, arrow notation, and we can call the test method. So this test, because of the underscore prefix, is really supposed to be used inside a class itself. So that's just something to take note of. And just to prove it, that I can still use this test method outside of the class, I'm just going to simply say that this is self. I'm just going to remove this, and I'm going to warn calling self, and save this, remove the second warn, go to the test script, save this up, and if I rerun it, we're going to see that it's calling underscore self at line 13. So that shouldn't have been self, but test, but you get the idea. You can call the methods prefix with underscore externally, but you really shouldn't do that. Alright, that's it for this video. We looked at subroutines in a mouse module and how to create different types of methods. I hope you found this video useful, and I'll see you at the next one.